Namaste and welcome to the Bharatvaarta Weekly. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to run you through the news and events of the week that was. I am Roshan Karyappa. I have Neerav Kanodra as well here with me to lend you some perspectives on what was important this past week. Well, we have plenty of news items to cover. We have India at the G20 Summit. Also, there was a milestone event, India's first private space flight by the company Skyroot in partnership with ISRO. Then we had the businessman Gautam Adanis saying that India will be the second largest economy by 2050. Wow, that seems like an ambitious goal. And of course, on the sports side, we have the FIFA World Cup starting in Qatar today. And post the T20 World Cup, the BCCI has sacked the senior men's selection committee. And finally, catch India's perspective on COP27 that recently happened. So if this is the first time you're joining us, we produce episodes on politics, policy and culture. We put out a couple of episodes or more every week. Do follow us and subscribe to us so you can catch all of these episodes wherever you get them. If you're a returning visitor, do consider rating us and reviewing us. It certainly helps more people discover the podcast. Well, with that out of the way, let's get started. Last week, we put out a pretty interesting episode on the midterm elections in the US. Of course, we had our resident election nerd Rohit Jayaraman slicing and dicing through the numbers and thinking about what is in store for the Democrats and the Republicans over the course of the year. Neerav, did you happen to catch the episode?
Just briefly, but I was waiting to actually the election results to come out in completion, and it's funny that they're still counting for a few states, and for the Senate they have one more runoff, right? So it is a bit interesting. It wasn't a change election, so as some people expected, that makes the 2024 presidential election even more interesting. So yeah, and Rohit Jayaraman is an election nerd. He goes through the numbers. Episode is definitely worth a listen.
Yeah. So definitely catch that. It definitely answers more than a couple of questions. What is the way ahead for the Republicans? Is DeSantis the next presidential nominee? Is there a future ahead for a former president, Donald Trump? And so on. By the way, Donald Trump is back on Twitter. He was reinstated after Elon Musk's poll, so that should be interesting as well. We'll move on to the first piece of news. Over the past week, the 17th G20 Summit took place in Bali under the presidency of Indonesia. The G20 communique echoed Prime Minister Narendra Modi's message to Russian President Vladimir Putin, underlining that today's era must not be of war. In their first meeting in public since the Indo-China border standoff in 2020, Prime Minister Modi and President Xi shook hands and spoke to each other. The US opined that India played an essential role in negotiating the G20 declaration. The gavel has been passed, and on December 1st, India will take over the presidency of the G20. In the coming months, India will host more than 200 official meetings and a similar number of engagement groups. Neerav, this is an important summit, and we had a lot to say and do.
Yeah, so this G20 was in person. It was in Bali. Up till now, the G20 presidency, which goes by rotation. So was with Indonesia, now next is going to be India. Key absence was obviously Vladimir Putin. Key presence was actually China's President Xi Jinping. She actually attended in person after being in isolation for almost 2.5 years, right? And having not visited other countries easily. So that was the key events. On the communique, India has said earlier as well that India stands for peace, and this is not an era of war. We do not want this kind of escalating to a world war type of situation, and try to resolve whatever boundary disputes are there peacefully between Russia and Ukraine. India has been very opportunistic, and India has been criticized by the West because it is buying Russian oil, it is buying Russian wheat as well, while India is actually a grain surplus country. So India is importing Russian wheat and exporting Indian wheat abroad. But India is being opportunistic in this kind of a scenario. But they're saying that yes, we stand for peace, despite not voting against Russia in the UN General Assembly, where anyways Russia has a veto, so it doesn't matter. But India has been neutral and continues to be neutral and stand for peace. Moving ahead, the next year when India is taking over the G20 presidency, 2023 G20, the main meeting will be held in India, as well as 200 smaller meetings between groups. So the slogan is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, or One Earth, One Family, and also the symbol is the lotus. There's a lot of criticism from opposition parties that why is BJP choosing lotus as a symbol, but because it's also BJP's election symbol, right? But lotus is India's national flower, and also given the environment, lotus kind of arises from the mud, from the dirt, and it gives like a beautiful flower. I think it's a nice metaphor for the world we're going through chaos, but the end result can be beautiful, right? So that is there, and it kind of is like very Indian motif, right? It's used in Indian religious things as well. So it also, the seven petals of the lotus, right? They are very significant as well. They represent the seven continents, right? So I think it's kind of a very good symbol. Going back in the existing G20, India interacted with like all the world leaders. A couple of positive interactions were with the UK, with Prime Minister Rishi Sunak. So one is the India-UK FTA is being worked on. So they spoke about that. Also, there's a program for young professionals where 3,000 Indians with advanced degrees will get easier visas every year to the UK. So this is also like a better people-to-people exchange, allows Indian companies to expand in the UK and vice versa. Also, UK companies can tap through like Indian talent pool. So that is also like a very big positive. And India has interacted with the US, while US has been upset with India not taking its side, right, on the Russia issue, where India has chosen to be neutral. I think there was like a very positive interaction with President Joe Biden, and India was allowed to frame the communique, right? So where we came out with the statement that this is not an era of war, this is an era of peace. So all in all, it's a positive thing. Expect like a lot more traffic. My Indonesian friends were telling me that this year, due to the G20, there were a lot more people visiting Indonesia, Jakarta and Bali. And so expect all airports to be clogged next year, which is a positive. A lot more flights coming into India. And this is also a great time to showcase any improvements in infrastructure, right? And get infrastructure up and running. So that's also like a very big positive. It's time to showcase the recent developments in India on the world.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, in more amazing news, on Friday at 11:30 a.m., Indian Space Research Organization (ISRO) kicked off the suborbital rocket Vikram S, built by Skyroot Aerospace from the Satish Dhawan Space Center in Sriharikota, India. The rocket took off at a launch elevation of 80 degrees and azimuth of 100 degrees, achieved an altitude of 89.5 kilometers and a range of 121.2 kilometers, exactly what was planned by Skyroot Aerospace. Pawan Chandana, Chief Executive of Skyroot, said Friday's launch validated the company's 3D printed solid fuel motor and carbon fiber body. In June, the executive had confirmed that the company 3D prints its engines from additive manufacturing facilities in Bangalore and Chennai. Once the demand builds up, Skyroot would also look to build its own 3D printing engine manufacturing facility, akin to what Agnikul Cosmos unveiled in July this year. The Minister of State for the Ministries of Science and Technology, Dr. Jitendra Singh, said, "It is indeed a new beginning, a new dawn, or as our team members have put it, a new prarambh, or beginning, in the journey of India's space program. It is a major step towards India developing its space ecosystem and emerging in the front line in the community of world nations. It's also a turning point in India's startup movement." I cover Indian startup ecosystem quite often on another podcast called The Startup Operator, and often I'm asked, why is capital chasing such frivolous ideas as maybe quick commerce or some other kind of thing, right? And I always 10-minute food delivery and so on. In fact, I did a episode on that on the Naan Curry podcast last week. And I always assure them that, look, capital will find its way to harder, deeper challenges, and it's already happening, right? Whether it is climate change, whether it is molecular biology and space tech and so on and so forth, right? So private capital will definitely come into these areas once there is certain validation of the technology, once there is validation of the economy and the business, economic and the business model and so on, right? Prarambh, in that sense, is a milestone event to me because it was a demonstration mission aimed at basically showing people that, hey, we can take customer payloads into space. So it's indeed validated the technology, the engine designs and so on and so forth. It also carried student-made payloads, including one by Space Kids India. So Skyroot is one of those cutting-edge space tech startups that we have, along with Agnikul and so on. And the wonderful thing is that ISRO has partnered with these folks to help them use their launch facilities and some of the know-how and the expertise and so on, right? So which is really amazing. So Skyroot was started by Pawan and Bharat, who are IIT Kharagpur and IIT Madras alumni, and they had raised a $11 million Series A sometime back by folks like Mukesh Bansal, Balaji Srinivasan, and so on, right? So this is really positive news, I should say, right? Considering that the whole space race is heating up, right? We have the world's billionaires whether it is Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, or Richard Branson, really focused on space, this is going to become a very viable economic field in the next 5-10 years itself, not even in the distant future, right? And it's going to be real use cases, not things like asteroid mining and so on, which we often hear about. It could be spectroscopy and so on, right? I mean, things that could impact stuff like weather prediction, agriculture, and so on. So this
Even
is
satellite television.
correct, satellite television as well. This is fantastic stuff. And ISRO, in fact, has been working on a reusable launch vehicle as well. And, I was just looking at that wiki page, and it's probably 9 or 10 companies and countries in the world who have possibly tried to do this, right? We all remember that Falcon 9 launch of SpaceX, and it was just a truly marvelous feat of engineering to see something that big, that fast, and that crazy technical, right? I mean, that crazy complicated, go up to space and come back, right? So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of developments happening on space. We, in fact, had a couple of scientists from ISRO on the podcast some time back. We will link to that episode, and, those who are interested can check it out. But, yeah, something to be proud of as an Indian, right, Nirav?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think, see, two major takeaways. One is India is opening up to the private sector like the US has. And we are having ISRO, which has actually achieved a lot in space and launched satellites for other countries, allowing its use of its facilities. So the launch from Sriharikota, that's like a very good thing where it's a nice public-private partnership. So that is one thing. And thing number two is this is a new avenue generator for exports, that you have other companies, so other countries coming to India to launch their payloads into space. So earlier it was just a domain of USA, ex-Soviet countries, so part of USSR, but like Russia and Kazakhstan has like a very big launching facility, and China, right? And now India is also a part of it. India has launched satellites for Israel in the past, but that was via ISRO. Now you got the private sector coming in as well, and obviously from like weather forecasting, from geo mapping and satellites, the GPS that we use, or even satellite television, right? Live telecasts around the world, all of those things put together, this is, or even like Satlink for internet anywhere in the world, right? So there are a lot of use cases coming up, and this opens up a whole new avenue. And it's a great thing that brilliant minds are using something for like development of all of human race to the next frontier, right, into space. So definitely it's very, very exciting.
Yeah, amazing. Well, on that optimistic note, delivering a keynote speech on India's path to an economic superpower at the World Congress of Accountants 2022 in Mumbai on Saturday, Gautam Adani said that India is set to become a $30 trillion economy by 2050, and the share of global GDP is likely to exceed 20%. He anticipated that in the next decade, India will start adding $1 trillion to its GDP every 12 to 18 months, increasing its attraction as an investment destination. He also added that the economic growth will likely mean India's energy consumption will rise by 400% by 2050, and the company will undertake an unparalleled energy transition to cater for its demand, while reaffirming his group's commitment to invest $70 billion in clean energy value chain. Nirav, this is a very bold statement by someone who has a lot of skin in the game.
So one is, see, obviously Gautam Adani has to be optimistic the amount that he's investing, and a lot of his business is hitting on future of India, right? Very domestically focused, very large conglomerate into energy and infrastructure. So obviously he would be expected to talk on the more positive spectrum of things, right? But given the fact India needs like political stability, and India needs policies which continue this. So see, we are 28 years away from his prediction in 2050, and if we continue growing at this pace, then it should be a no-brainer, right? He's very wisely kept away who the biggest economy will be. So will it be China or the US? So see, currently China is about 5.5 times India's economy at about 18 trillion. India is 3.5 trillion. You have US at about 25 trillion, and then you've got Germany, Japan ahead of us, right? And now India is the fifth biggest, just gone ahead of UK and France, who are sixth and seventh behind us. So definitely India's demographics on its side. India has a lot of low-hanging fruit. So just by sorting out infrastructure, just by sorting out a lot of things, India can go ahead. The great opportunity obviously is electric vehicles and transition to green hydrogen. And Gautam Adani as well as Mukesh Ambani, the two richest men in India, put a lot of money in development of green hydrogen and blue hydrogen, right? And you had a podcast on the transition to hydrogen-based energy. So I think that is like a very critical thing. India right now is like a net importer, where India actually imports more than it exports. And Gautam Adani also said that India is going to become a net exporter in the next decade, right? So I think this is very positive, even if you discount it a bit, saying that Gautam Adani is talking his own book. But all his scenarios are plausible, and I am definitely as bullish as him. Hopefully, we get there sooner, right? So it's just like we saw so many unicorns coming out of India, and you see the growth component. While the base might be low, the growth component of India is pretty high. So absolutely, totally echo his thoughts.
Yeah. I mean, at such a massive scale, it's a matter of compounding, right? I mean, someone, recently reminded me the 10 years after the ABV government fell, right? And what a massive, opportunity cost that was, right? Because even at a 1
Yes.
or 2% additional growth, we would have been very differently placed at this point of time.
Absolutely. So that's the thing, right? This is contingent on irrespective of which political party, but everybody going for pro growth policies instead of trying to be pro redistribution very soon. India is a poor country. We do not have enough to redistribute already, right? So we have to become a middle income and a rich country before we start thinking about redistribution of wealth. So absolutely, it's just like we think about it, compounded like 1 to 1.5% over 10 years is actually like 25%, right? So India might have been 25% richer on an aggregate had we had like similar policies continuing for a decade, which probably was like somewhat of a lost decade, and then we're trying to come out of it after the global financial crisis, and finally things are looking up. So absolutely.
Well, I mean, it seems like we can only find positive news on this
This
on
week
this
has been
long run.
particularly positive.
which is great. I mean, I hope every week is like this. The FIFA World Cup kicks off today. I mean, there's an opening Group A match between the hosts Qatar and Ecuador on Sunday. The opening ceremony will be at the Al Bayt Stadium, 40 kilometers north of Doha, named and designated after the tents used by nomads in the Gulf. The Al Bayt Stadium is the furthest venue from central Doha, but also one of the biggest. It's not without controversy since 2010, when Qatar was awarded the hosting rights, being dubbed as the World Cup of controversies by critics and the internet. Some of the reasons include that this is the first Winter World Cup, moved from June, July to November, December. Then there is the case of the whole fact of Middle East money and corruption allegations and the terrible human rights history of Qatar and so on and so forth, right? Nirav, irrespective of all of that, I'm going to tune out all the noise and watch the World Cup, right? Because the World Cup comes around once in 4 years, and it's just a fantastic display of skill, right? I mean, I'm not a very big football fan, but I do make it a point to definitely follow the World Cup matches at that. I'm going to be rooting for Argentina, and I hope that, Lionel Messi has that last flourish. What about you?
Yeah, so I think like a couple of predictions I want to make. I want to stick my neck out. So one is typically the winner of the previous World Cup, so France in this case, crashes out in the group stage. One of the reasons is because they don't have to play through the qualifying, they get an automatic entry. They don't play very well as a team. They're not as coordinated, whereas others have to go through some qualifying tournaments, etc. So they're already used to playing as a team. Theme number two is Latin American countries no longer play very well as a team because all their stars play in Europe all the time. They don't play together very well. So maybe Argentina could still win, but on an average, probably Latin American teams might not do as well as like kind of their ranking or the expectations are. And this is going to be very interesting because as you mentioned, like first World Cup in the winter, nobody has like a real advantage of playing in the Middle East. We've seen typically whenever it's held in Latin America, a Latin American team is one. Whenever it's held in Europe, it's a European team is one on an average. Germany winning in Brazil was one of the exceptions. So that is also pretty interesting. It can throw up a lot of surprises. So I would say on the surprises front, I am rooting for Japan and South Korea. They've over the years kind of like steady incremental progress, right? They started getting slightly and slightly better and better at football. So I think they could pose a couple of like upsets in the group stages, and I am actually rooting for either Spain or Germany. My bet is you'll see a European country lift the football World Cup, but like not a very big football fan. I just follow it for the fun, and it's a great display of athleticism, good sport. So absolutely, and the time zone also being closer to India and like for Singapore, the time zone is very convenient. So every evening after work, we got something to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the time zone is really such an added advantage this time, right? I mean, hopefully we'll follow all of the matches more closely. Moving on, the 27th Conference of Parties or COP ended, and India's announcements last year and this year are now the pillars of its climate leadership. COP26 last year was a watershed moment because of the Prime Minister's announcement of the country's plan to go net zero by 2070. This year's COP27 in Egypt, however, will be remembered for the country's path-breaking announcement of a long-term strategy or LTS for low carbon development. With this, India joins the coveted list of 56 countries that have submitted their LTS. Nirav, you've spoken of Vaibhav before, and this is a pretty significant step as well. Could you help us understand?
See, I think COP26 was the bigger one, where India did make the net zero by 2070. Here, what they've said is that right now some countries are being demonized for still using coal, etc. Right? India says 2070 is a long time away. We have a long-term strategy of going and reducing carbon emissions, and also there are technologies such as carbon capture and storage. The CO2 emitted from, say, a coal power plant is collected, it's separated from the nitrogen and oxygen in the air, in the exhaust. You liquefy it and you store it underground in the mines, right? So from where you kind of mined out coal. So I think that is one technology which India has spoken about. India is being open to such technology. So we may not completely phase out coal, but we may have net carbon zero emissions, right? So that is one significant statement. The second one is obviously it's about the transition, right? It's a transition. It's where we are and where are we going to. As a developing economy, our emissions will still rise till it reaches an inflection point and starts falling. But we need to have intermediary fuels in between. So we will be using carbon-based fuels. Unlike the Western nations, which have been the chief pollutants in the past, they cannot expect emerging economies to reduce emissions immediately. But these carbon emissions right now are paving the way to alternative fuels. So solar, wind, hydrogen, nuclear, etc. Right? So we are going through like a very big transition phase. So we need to have a long-term strategy. See, we have a compass. We know what direction we are going in. There might be a few twists and turns during the way, but we know where we are headed, right? So that's the very clean and clear message from India. It reaffirms our commitment to 2070 net zero, but we are not taking diktats from other countries on how do we get there. We will forge our own path and we will reach there. So absolutely. And then it's another time where India is taking leadership on this whole climate transition as well, standing up for all the other emerging economies.
Right. Few of the takeaways of the long-term strategy: India's LTS has prioritized 6 strategic sectors: electricity, transport, urban, industry, carbon dioxide removal, and forests. India has also identified finance as a key enabler for its LTS vision. And there's a In Our Lifetime campaign launched by India at COP27. Campaign is a great way to encourage youth to become ambassadors of sustainable lifestyle practices and grow into leaders that lead the way in biodiversity conservation and natural resource management. Well, plenty of good stuff. On maybe, we're probably ending on a slightly sour note, I suppose. I still think that it's a hopeful, optimistic note for the future. The BCCI has chosen to replace the senior men's selection committee led by former Indian fast bowler Chetan Sharma. Some of the reasons believed to have led to the sacking are not being able to have a settled squad, allowing 8 international captains in just 1 year, picking KL Rahul after an 8-month hiatus from T20 cricket, and more. Nirav, this was on expected lines, but seems like, a complete replacement. I can't remember the last time when the entire selection board was thrown away, right?
Yeah, also typically this is thrown away right after a tournament. I think BCCI has been given a long leeway where everybody's term ended and usually only a few players will be replaced at a time, few selectors. Here the complete throwaway is kind of drastic thing. Thing is, India has done not very well at the 2021 T20 World Cup, which was actually supposed to be in 2020 but was delayed for a year, and now in 2022. This is something where they feel that despite not doing well, we kind of retained 8 players in the playing 11 from the previous World Cup itself. And probably the selectors, they've been thinking more on the conventional strategies. They're not so well versed with probably T20. It's kind of a reboot. It's a reset. That we need to think, if something's not working, we need to reset and rethink what the strategy was. Maybe, I think changing the selectors is just like a signal. It is the first step. Maybe more drastic changes will be coming in the team itself. We might see a more focused, more T20 team being drastically different from the Test and the ODI teams. Maybe we have 3 distinct teams playing 3 different sports. Only a few players be multi-format. So, I don't know. I would like to take it hopefully that this is a sign of things trying to change for the better. Change for the sake of change does nothing. So, let's wait and watch. I think India has a huge talent pool playing, and it's just surprising why India doesn't win everything. So, hopefully this is a step, and it's not just something taken out of frustration and sacking the selection committee and we get a new selection committee and everybody just selects the same players, then that's no point, right?
Yeah. What do you make of this proposal to have three different teams for the three different formats? Because I think we're getting to a point where the skills don't necessarily transfer, right? We've seen England adopt this plan as well, right? I mean, because I think T20 is a different game altogether, right? I mean, it requires a different mindset and skill set also, right?
Yeah, so one is mindset, skill set, muscle memory, right?
Yeah.
For a bowler, the length you bowl in T20 very different from what you bowl in Test cricket. For a batsman, the stance that you have or the kind of shots you play, the percentage shots, the risky shot that you would like shelve it in Test cricket in T20, you have to go for it, right? So I think there's a lot of muscle memory involved, there's a lot of practice training which goes in, as well as there's a lot of cricket being played. So that is why multi-format players tend to get injured too often. Bumrah and Ravindra Jadeja are like classic examples who play in every format for India, and unfortunately that they were injured, right? So India has the IPL, India has the Syed Mushtaq Ali Trophy and the Vijay Hazare Trophy for 50 over cricket. So I think India could try and look at specialists. Even in the domestic sector, people would try specializing in one field, which gives them a better shot at being selected to the national team, right? So maybe that is the way forward. Maybe that's the way the sport evolves.
I saw a particularly interesting, segment where Wasim Akram and Waqar Younis, of course, the legendary Pakistani fast bowlers, said that perhaps you may need to cap the pay of some of these young players because they're making 8-10 crores a season in IPL and they don't have that same motivation to play at these international tournaments. While I don't think that is necessarily true, right? Because an India cap is an India cap, right? I mean, it's the status of legends. What do you think we can do to make the ICC tournaments a little more aspirational? Because over the 8-10 years, I don't think we've won a lot.
So one is yes, India hasn't won after the 2011 World Cup. India hasn't won much. But I would say, you know what, this is the same allegation made like in soccer as well. We're having the Football World Cup where you say like a lot of players care more about their club than the country. I think the only way out of this is say more prize money in these World Cups. Definitely the viewership is a lot bigger, right? There is more value in the TV rights, bigger prize money, etc. That's at stake. Also, now maybe older traditional stats don't matter as much. What mattered a lot more, like when Gavaskar was the highest run scorer in the world, or Kapil Dev was the highest wicket taker in the world, etc. But I think there is like a lot of pride involved. So I think there's a lot of maybe media and marketing does need to get in. I don't believe that we need like salary caps. Those kind of things kind of like, they have unintended consequences. I'm a believer in free markets. I believe that sports people are elite athletes and they have a very short career. So they need to make the most of it. We have like a large enough pool. We have a large viewing population. There is enough money in the sport. And this is what keeps the sport alive, because this keeps the pipeline coming, that if one player gets injured, we have a like-for-like replacement for all 11 if required, right? And India can afford to post like 3 very dedicated teams. We don't have shortage of players. So I wouldn't be very inclined on that part. Maybe Wasim Akram and Waqar Younis, like our India selectors, are living in the era of 80s and 90s, right? In a different era where sport wasn't as commercialized. But given whatever is the today's day and age, maybe you have to move on with the times.
Right. Well, on that note, we come to the end of this week's weekly. Thank you so much for tuning in. And we have a couple of interesting episodes coming up next week and the week after. We have Professor Salvatore Babones, who is, of course, the man in the limelight, spoke very eloquently at the India Today conclave and has since been a darling of the Indian media. We're going to talk to him about some of these democracy rankings and how they, in his words, give India a bum rap. Do check that out. And then also we have the author, Dr. Deepthi Navratna, who's written this book called The Maverick Maharaja on the Mysore Raja Jaicham Rajendra Wadiyar. So we'll be talking to the author about the significance of the book and also, I mean, the life and times of a very interesting person. Vivek Khaitan will be hosting that podcast shortly. So a lot of good content coming up. Do continue to support us. I mean, it keeps us motivated, inspired to do a lot more. Thank you again for joining us from Nirav and myself. Stay safe, take care, and Jai Hind.